Good evening, everyone. My name is David Nocenti, and I'm the Executive Director of Union Settlement and the Chair of the East Harlem Community Alliance. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to the East Harlem Mayoral Forum. For those of you who are not aware, the East Harlem Community Alliance is a consortium of about 200 organizations in East Harlem, nonprofits, for-profit businesses, religious congregations, and government agencies that are working together and have been for a number of years to improve the quality of life and the vitality of East Harlem. I want to thank the candidates who are joining us for the evening. Thank MNN for hosting this, and also thank you, the viewers. I also am joined by my co-hosts, Nilsa Orama. Nilsa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is obviously Nilsa Orama, as David said, and I'm a lifelong resident of East Harlem, and I am the director of a longstanding not-for-profit that is in East Harlem, as well as I'm involved in a lot of community groups. And it is my distinct pleasure to be here today and to welcome the candidates. And with that, I will start introducing the candidates. The first candidate, Art Chang. Welcome, Art.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. The next candidate I would like to introduce is Jocelyn Taylor.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening. As for tonight, we're going to have candidates potentially popping in and out. And so you will see that Kathryn Garcia just joined us. Say hello.
Hello. Nice to see everyone.
So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to David so that he can continue and give an overview of the rules.
So thank you all for joining. And as Nilsa indicated, there'll be other candidates joining. Just the background on the rules. So there are 3 sections to this mayoral forum. There are 90-second opening statements. And then there will be a Q&A section where all the candidates get to respond to each of the questions, and then 90-second closing statements. The mayoral forum will run until 7:30 p.m. and then it'll be followed by a panel of East Harlem Community Alliance member agencies, which will then discuss what transpired during the forum. The questions that you'll be getting this evening were recommended by members of the East Harlem Community Alliance. And each candidate will be given 90 seconds to answer, and we will be rotating the order of the questioning. Everyone will be muted, so the candidates will be able to unmute themselves when they're going to talk. And then you'll get a countdown clock with 15 seconds left to go, at which point we'll ask you to complete your sentence. So with that, we're going to turn it over to the opening statements. Nilsa?
Yes, thank you so much. And we're going to give you 90-second opening statements in the following order. And we're going to start with Mr. Art Chang.
Art, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Well, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Art Chang, and I'm running to be your mayor. I'm going to start off by talking about what makes me the same as the other candidates, but also, more importantly, what makes me different. Everyone in this race wants everyone to have a home, to have a roof over their head, to have food on the table, to be safe, to have quality education for their students, and then to be able to have opportunities in life. But what makes me different is that I have 40 years of experience transforming our city, 40 years in the private sector, and 30 years in the public sector, including transforming government. In the private sector, I've worked in technology, and I've worked in finance, and I have created 11 tech startups in this city, including 2 tech incubators. On the public side, I've worked for the City Corporation Council's office. I put Queens West in the ground, and I was on the campaign finance board for 9 years, where I co-created NYC Votes. I was born in Jim Crow, Atlanta. I grew up in an all-white neighborhood in Ohio. I know racism on the street and domestic violence at home. I know what it feels like to be different. And I came to New York because I wanted to belong. I want a New York City where everyone belongs. And I think a New York City that will work for everyone. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Art. The next opening statement you'll hear from is Ms. Kathryn Garcia.
Thank you. I'm Kathryn Garcia. I am a lifelong New Yorker and I deeply love this city. And I am running for mayor because we need a more livable city, a more affordable city, where no matter the color of your skin, you feel safe in your community and on the street. And you might not have known my name, but you've known my work. For the last 14 years, I have been the go-to crisis manager for the city. Whether or not that was pumping water during Hurricane Sandy, plowing your streets during snowstorms, picking up your garbage, managing billions of dollars in the city budget, and during COVID, setting up an emergency food distribution system that is delivering over 1 million meals a day. I know what it takes to not only make a plan, but deliver on a plan. We are starting to see a new day dawn in the city of New York. We are coming out of COVID, but the hard work of recovery is just beginning. We need an education system that works for everyone and means good jobs and good careers. We need housing that heals. We need to make sure that everyone is safe on their streets. And I have proven time and time again that I am the person everyone turns to when there's a crisis to get things done. I am excited to be here tonight. I have a deep love for this city, and that's why I'm running for mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. And we will now move to Ms. Jocelyn Taylor. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you so much. I want to just first and foremost just thank the sponsors and everyone who put this together. I truly appreciate it. I am excited, and I'm running for mayor of this city because I love New York. I grew up in Brooklyn in pink houses, which is a NYC development. And my story and my family's story is similar to a lot of the stories of many of the residents of East Harlem. I've gone to public school in New York. I raised my son as a single mom. And when my sister passed away, I did what our families do. I stepped up to help raise her kids as well. I worked at what is considered a good state job. And as someone who has lived my life, all of my life in this city, I love this city. And I'm running for mayor because, quite frankly, I'm tired. And from visiting East Harlem, I know that you're tired too. While we've had some amazing press conferences and a lot of finger pointing, we haven't seen results. Every day, the everyday citizens of this city, East Harlem residents included, are doing their part. They're investing in the city through their taxes, and it's time for us to ensure that they start to see a return on that investment. For many of us, we've been fighting for all of our lives, but as your mayor, I'll bring leadership into the city that won't fight, but will work together to ensure that this is a place of inclusion and transparency. So I look forward to earning your support.
Thank you so much, Ms. Taylor. And with that, we have one more. I'm sorry, I'm having a little vision issue. Is that Mr. Adams?
Yes, it is. How are you?
I'm fine, Mr. Adams. Welcome to our forum. And if you have 90 seconds to please introduce yourself to our audience, I would appreciate that.
Thank you so much. As all of my colleagues know, I come with my own stopwatch, so I want to make sure I set it. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And my name is Eric Adams, and I'm running to be the mayor of the city of New York. And I believe the best story that would personify why I'm running, between K through 12, I was a D student throughout my school year. And it wasn't until I was in high school or college before I realized that it wasn't that I couldn't learn, but I had a learning disability. No one diagnosed it. I stumbled onto a video that explained it, and I said, wait a minute. And I taught myself how to overcome that learning disability. And I became an A student on the dean list, had a successful career in college, my associates, my bachelor's, my master's. That was luck. We have to stop betraying New Yorkers. You don't need luck to find affordable housing, luck to get employed, luck to ensure that your children receive quality education. We can't continue to run this city hoping that you stumble on the right things. We betrayed New Yorkers, and I ensured the safety of New Yorkers as a police officer and as the founder of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I'm going to run a city not based on luck, but based on opportunities. And I'm excited to engage in this conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. And with that, I will move it back to David for the continuation of the forum.
Thank you, Nilsa. So our first question, and we're going to go in the same order as the opening statement, starting with Mr. Chang, and the topic is homelessness. So I'd like each of the candidates to tell us what you know about the issues of street homelessness and drug activity on East 125th Street and the other main commercial corridors in East Harlem. And tell us what actions you'll take to address these issues, including the oversaturation of drug treatment facilities in this community. Mr. Chang.
Street homelessness on 125th Street is a problem, especially the homeless who are mentally ill. It causes an atmosphere of lack of safety. It causes other kinds of issues that are a detriment to the community. And as you mentioned, there is an overconcentration of substance abuse treatment centers in that neighborhood. So what I think the first thing we have to do is actually take care of folks who are mentally ill. And as mayor, I would institute 10,000 units of 2,000 beds of supportive housing for mentally ill people, get them off the street and into treatment. We have great nonprofits in the city who can help address that. I would use the city's access to some of the hotels to be able to house those folks. And then, like I said, partner with the nonprofits. In terms of the distribution of drug treatment centers, one of the first things that I would do is have a citywide conversation around a plan and look at the distribution of these kinds of facilities, along with centers for the homeless, along with low-income housing, and look at all the different neighborhoods around the city and ensure that we have a fair and equitable distribution of these types of places. And these would also be done in conjunction with the community. So the communities need adequate transportation, parks, schools, health facilities, and other things. So all of these things are interconnected, and we need to do a much better job in the city of being able to allocate these things in places where people are. I'm an advocate of being able to have these places which are 15-minute communities where someone can come out and actually be able to access everything they need in their day-to-day life within a 15-minute walk, including my signature proposal, which is universal childcare.
Thank you so much. Ms. Garcia, and then you'll be followed by Ms. Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. East Harlem has borne the brunt of not only the drug treatment centers, but a lack of support from the city to ensure that we do not have folks just hanging out dealing drugs on the corners, because it's not only the homeless who are there, but it is also people who are coming for their treatment and attracting dealers because they are following them. And I did think that when the Pathmark closed and we were no longer had the return bottle situation there at 125th and Lex, that might make it better. We have not seen that. And we need to make sure that we are patrolling our streets, but it's broader. It's about enforcement, but it's also about keeping the streets clean. And it's about giving the folks who need treatment, particularly supportive housing beds, access to those supportive housing beds. I understand how to manage large city agencies and get them to treat East Harlem as the customer that is for the property taxes that they pay. And I have been up there talking to small businesses who are making lifelong investments in East Harlem to ensure that they are able to thrive. We need to create a livable community that supports them moving forward. You know, that is why I'm running for mayor, because we cannot over-concentrate all of the methadone clinics in one neighborhood. It has to be distributed equitably. And we also know that, particularly in that area, when there was congregate shelter on Randall's Island, that first bus stop was also really a challenge. This can't be how we manage the city. We have to make it a more livable city. And when I'm mayor, I'll make it happen.
Thank you so much for that. Ms. Taylor and then Borough President Adams.
Thank you. I've had an opportunity to go up to East Harlem on many occasions, and I have to say, it's been a little, if you go to that area, it's been a little scary. I recently saw a news article, or I saw a news segment on Channel 11 when they were up in the area with an organization that's up in that area trying to help those residents and those individuals that are experiencing, excessive drug use, homelessness. And one of the things I learned from looking at that segment is that we have to meet people where they are. There was a gentleman on that segment that said that he loves to get high every day. There's nothing that would stop him from doing that. So we have to address the realities of what people are living with and the fact that we've created a world that people want to escape from. How do we do that? We have to provide mental health services first and foremost. We have to provide not just needles, but drug rehabilitation facilities that give people the access and the ability to address their drug issues. And we also need to provide some supportive housing. We can't just think that, the homelessness issue is about just providing housing. These people need long-term support. They need to be in a housing situation, and we, as mayor, I will create a housing situation that will ensure that going forward, that they don't take a step back. So we need to ensure that we have housing that has drug counselors there. We need to make sure that we have housing that has, job opportunities there. We have to make sure that we have housing that includes, mental health resources. And those are the type of things that will give us a different result. But it's a huge issue in East Harlem and one that has to be addressed. We won't address it by just, giving people needles. People need results.
Thank you so much. Borough President Adams?
Yes, and so for clarity, what is the response time? Is it a minute?
2 minutes, 2 minutes to respond to each
Thank you.
question.
Thank you very much. Problems like what you're seeing in Harlem, you need an intervention and a prevention. And oftentimes we talk about prevention. That's the long-term aspect of what we should do to really stop the pipeline of a crisis. But while we're putting in place the prevention, we must have intervention. There are real issues that are taking place in Harlem now because of, number one, the drop off of a countless number of homeless men from the Randall's Island. You see what's happening along First of 2nd Avenue, 3rd Avenue, Lexington. That needs immediate intervention right away. So we have to examine that. I walked that area. I walked from the river all the way across down to the Whole Foods, where you see an oversaturation of drug problems, oversaturation of treatments. I met with the leaders there and engaged in a conversation. A large number of the people are coming from outside the area. So we need a real GIS mapping system that shows, with a level of transparency, where are the drug treatment centers going, in which community, in which area, and have a real plan to build out to ensure that this doesn't continue to oversaturate areas and change those centers where you do have the oversaturation. Then we need to be clear to stop this call to legalize heroin, legalize fentanyls, legalize crack cocaine. That would devastate our communities, and it only feeds the crisis that we're looking for now. Lastly, we have to build trust. It starts with just giving a pair of socks, food. If you want to get people off the streets into supportive housing, you can't just come to them and tell them to do it. You must build trust, and that's what I'm going to do with my street team as we build that trust.
Great, thank you so much. Nilsa?
Hello, everyone. So I will be asking question number 2, and I'm going to start first with Ms. Garcia, and then I will, the follow-up person after Ms. Garcia will be Ms. Taylor. And the second question has to do with public schools. There are many low-performing schools in New York City, and many of these schools have less experienced teachers. What specific steps will you take to improve the quality of public school education here in East Harlem?
You know, our education system is failing our students. The reopening and closing madness, the lack of a plan for September. And honestly, I've seen it firsthand. My sister is a public school teacher, and sometimes she's found out from Twitter whether or not she's working the next day. And our kids deserve the best education that really prepares them for the 21st century for a career. And our parents want to trust that their local public school will provide that. We want to know that our taxpayer dollars are hard at work. And my plan begins first and foremost with taking $130 million out of the administration portion of the budget and putting it in classrooms and making the principals responsible for delivering on great education. We have not equitably funded this school system for my entire life. That has to change immediately. We need to embed art and theater and music and sports in every school so that we are educating the whole child and all of their talents. But I will expand support for the 140 schools that have 20% homeless children in them. They need more, and I will deliver that. And I am the only candidate who has been negotiating with unions my entire career. And I know my way around a city budget as an operator, and I know what it means to be accountable. And finally, I'm a product of the public school system. I know they can be great. We should not be failing our kids. We have to double down because education is what makes this city and its future possible.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. With that, we will move to Ms. Taylor. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you so much. You know, as a person who is a product of public school education, I know the challenges that a lot of our students are experiencing within the city. And it's been very interesting to me that when it comes to divesting in education, much like NYCHA, that happens with us having a lot of conversation around it. It's like a thief in the night. We've come out and we've taken things out of school that are very important to kids. We took out cursive writing. We took out home economics. We took out carpentry. We took out music and art. Those are the things that kids need to be well-rounded and, you know, whole purposeful adults. And as mayor, I'm going to ensure that we start reinvesting in our kids because that's the biggest investment that we can make to ensure that the future is bright. We can't just continue to say, you know, the children are our future, but we're not investing in that future for children equitably across the board. So as mayor, I'm going to ensure that we invest in every school equitably. You can go into various schools and you can see the inequity walking inside the door. And it's very important that we invest because we understand and we see the results when we don't invest. Right? The child that, you know, graduates from public school, elementary school, and can't read becomes the problem in junior high school, becomes the dropout in high school. So we're going to invest and ensure that every child has access to a good education, quality education going forward from elementary school. I'm going to ensure that every child has technology, that has access to Wi-Fi, because this is 2021. We live in a technological era. And I'm going to ensure that our children have all of the resources, regardless of neighborhood, regardless of zip code, that they have all of the resources that they need so that they can be whole, purposeful human beings and give them the access to try other things so that they can figure out who they want to be when they grow up. School is supposed to be a learning experience.
Thank you so much, Ms. Taylor. Mr. Adams?
Thank you. Important issue. I say this over and over again. If you don't educate, you will incarcerate. And let's be clear on that. Look at the numbers. In your community, 38.4% of fourth graders perform at grade level compared to 49.6% citywide. Those numbers are bad citywide. They're horrific when you look at your community. 16 serious crime per 1,000 residents, which is 5 points higher than the city average. So it's clear that we're failing our students citywide, but look at communities like East Harlem, and it's really failure on steroid. So I know what a poor education is about. I was bused to school during the time when we were pushing for desegregation, but I also know how to be successful I put over $165 million into STEAM projects in my school. We're going to build out our CTA education like what I am doing at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the first of its kind in New York City, a Brooklyn STEAM Center that is really getting our children prepared for tomorrow. But again, we have to evaluate the entire child. We must ensure they develop their full personhood and then look at the real needs. Some of our children, they need washing machines in the school buildings, food pantry, support to deal with some of the social issues that are impacting the schools. Our funding should not be dependent solely on an equality. It should be based on an equitable fashion that makes sure the needs of the school and the social conditions around the school. We don't factor that in. And as the mayor, we're going to do that. And I'm going to really expand out, not K through 12. I'm going to expand out pregnancy through profession. And we're going to bring back the joy of learning in our schools to develop our children to their full capability and capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Mr. Chang?
Yes, I'd like to build on what Board President Adams said. Right now, we have the most segregated school system in the country. We also have the most segregated communities in the country, and the two things go hand in hand. When we talk about trying to lift schools up, I mean, it should be obvious that the greatest city in the United States should have the greatest education system, but we are so far away from that. So how do we do that? At this point, it seems like we are trying to push children, we're trying to push students to overcome the barriers that their communities face. And I believe that when we actually have equity in our communities, we're dealing with the student in the context of their family and in the context of their communities. That when we talk about equitable funding, it's not just school funding, it's all the funding that relates to the things that create well-being for the community to allow the student to have the best chance for success. I also want to build on another thing that Board President Adams said about students who are different and the importance of starting from very, very young age. That we know that human development starts in the womb, and so we should start looking at prenatal care. I have a plan for universal child care because right now in our economy, women have suffered the most damage. The fastest and best way to have equity among the physical and intellectual development for children is in early childhood. And then we can create thousands of new jobs by having universal child care. So that is a tentpole of my plan. But when we come back from COVID, not every student is going to be the same. We have about 30% of our student body has IEPs. And then after this COVID, after remote learning, we're going to have a significant portion who aren't really ready to learn. So we're going to need to think about really improving the guidance support for the students, psychological supports, and then meeting every student where they are through individualized education plans, going all the way up through high school, and then incorporating workforce development into college, especially at CUNY.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chang. David?
Thank you so much for those responses. Our next topic is the NYPD. We're going to start with Ms. Taylor and then Mr. Adams after that. So as you all know, East Harlem suffers from a disproportionate amount of crime, but simultaneously, there's a long-standing mistrust between the local residents and the NYPD. So this question does not relate to the level of funding that the NYPD should have, but regardless of that, can you please provide us with the specific steps you'll take to address the culture of the police department that causes much of the mistreatment and mistrust? Ms. Taylor.
So that's a great question because we have to address the culture. And I think part of the reason why we have this culture now is we've gotten away from something that I grew up with that was very important, and that's community policing. So if we want to address it, we have to bring back community policing in various neighborhoods. And this is not just happening in East Harlem. You know, I saw a group of gentlemen that were doing something very productive in the neighborhood in Queensbridge over the weekend, and they had the same issue. where there were like tons of police officers out there under the guise that when left to themselves, they can't be trusted. So we have to bring back community and policing, because these officers need to start to humanize the residents that they're there to serve and protect. You know, when you look around and you see what's happened in this city, it's become an instance where the police seem to police certain areas and keep other areas safe. And that's not acceptable. So we have to have additional training for officers. And we have to work in conjunction with the community, the leadership in the community, the churches, the community leaders, and NYCHA, the tenant association presidents, to bring back that sense of, you know, working together with the officers so that they can understand that their role there is to keep all of the residents safe. And as someone who experienced it personally in pink houses, you know, I know the difference between when I was growing up and Officer Myers really cared about me and knew, you know, to go to my mom if I didn't do something. And the officer now that comes to me and say, what are you doing here? Do you have permission to be here? It has to be a level of mutual respect. So that comes with training, and that comes with us holding officers accountable as well. You know, when officers have infractions, we have to address it. And as mayor, that's what I'll do.
Thank you so much. Borough President Adams, followed by Mr. Chang.
Thank you. So important. First thing, we have to change the ecosystem of public safety in the city and define the role that police departments play in that ecosystem. As it currently stands, policing is the entire ecosystem, and that's wrong. Once we identify the role that police play, then we need to ensure that we give resources to the other roles, crisis management teams, preventive measures. How do we become more proactive and not reactive to public safety? And then we need to tear down the wall that has divided police and the communities. Allow positive, proactive engagement. What does that look like? Right now, the only time the community interacts with the police is when something bad happens. We don't call the police to invite them to a birthday party. We call them when the party is being disrupted. How about ensuring that we have our young people do organized sports with our law enforcement, talk about drug prevention, doing very proactive ways of encouraging that engagement between police and community. We right now judge precinct commanders based on the number of arrests they made. How about judging them based on the number of things they did to prevent a crime? Promote them based on their ability to help through scholarship programs, other youth groups and youth organizations. And then let's remove our police from responding to non-police or criminal actions. Police officers don't have to go when someone is dealing with an emotional illness unless it's dangerous to life and property. But right now we send police officers to all of these things, and that's not the right way to do it. And lastly, we have to expeditiously remove abusive officers.
Thank you so much. Ms. Garcia?
We have seen a tremendous increase in criminal activity, particularly gun violence, anti-Asian, hate crimes, as well as crime on our subways. But we also have seen that communities don't trust the police anymore. We have been given a false choice that we can have public safety or we can have more liberty. These two things are not opposed to one another. We can have a city that's safe, where everyone feels that they are respected. And it's personal to me, because I was adopted and my brother was adopted and he is Black. And I have seen the beauty of diversity, but I've also seen how we can be treated very differently. My plan to change the culture of the NYPD is first and foremost to reintegrate neighborhood policing with more off radio time, which means they are interacting and not being expected to respond to a 911 call. That means increasing the age to 25, having them live within the city, making sure that we are measuring what we want to see as the outcome. Community engagement rather than arrest, and that we promote into the ranks those who are walking the walk and talking the talk, thinking about police as guardians of the whole community and not warriors against the community. But we have to have very clear and very transparent discipline to rebuild trust. Then we can celebrate the cops who are doing the right thing. And I know how to do this. I have worked with the uniformed agency for the last 7 years. I understand how to get culture change. It is what I am good at. And it is also completely possible for us to be the safest big city in the US with respect.
Thank you so much for those responses. Nilsa?
Okay, thank you so much. With that, I am going to first ask Ms. Taylor and then Borough President Adams to respond. There are high levels of unemployment and underemployment here in East Harlem, and an overall lack of funding for job training programs, particularly for youth. Do you believe there is a correlation between crime and the lack of youth employment options? And what steps would you take to increase training and education options for all East Harlem residents?
Am I going first? I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms. Taylor.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I definitely think there's a correlation between crime and the lack of jobs opportunities. You know, one of the things that I say is that, you know, who's not out committing crime? Someone has a decent livable wage job that they can get up and go to in the morning. They're not out committing crimes. I think, you know, there's a correlation between crime and the lack of job opportunities, and also the lack of proper education within communities. So we have to invest in providing additional resources and programs, but the programs that I want to develop have to have positive end results. I don't want it to be another Thrive NYC where we spent $1 billion, we don't know where the money went, and we don't know what the results are. I want to make sure that we're going to build out a program that actually gives kids the opportunity to have a job at the end of the program. And, you know, because we have to build that success. And when we see community members being able to have the opportunity to be successful, that'll encourage others to want to get involved as well. But, you know, it goes back to when we were talking about the Pathmark being, you know, taken down in the community. That was a huge loss for the community, because I know that Pathmark employed a lot of people in the community. But how we're going to bring back some of those jobs is the city spends $22 billion in the procurement of goods and services. I'm going to ensure that more of the small businesses in East Harlem have the opportunity to get city contracts and work with the city, because I know that those small businesses in East Harlem, when given that opportunity, are going to look to the community, and they're going to hire individuals within the community. And that's what people need, opportunity. And we have to create that opportunity by, you know, diversifying the number of firms that are working with the city so that everyone has an opportunity for success.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Borough President Adams.
Thank you. You know, as I said earlier, if you don't educate, you will incarcerate. And I want to add on that if you don't employ, you will also incarcerate. Think about this for a moment. We had over 300,000 jobs available pre-COVID-19 that we could not fill because the skills were not there. And so we don't have an employment problem, we have a skills problem. So what I'm going to do as mayor, I'm going to build out a single platform where we will partner with our corporations, our small businesses, and others who are looking for employees. And we're going to have them identify the skills that are needed. Then we are going to have a single platform for filling out job application, one type of application where we will be able to compare those who have the skills with the jobs that are available. And then we're going to ensure that those who don't have the skills, that they're going to be in a real modernized workforce development center where they're going to get the necessary skills, the necessary certification to fill in these amazing jobs around technology, food industry, and so many different areas. And we're going to do something else that's very important. We're going to do the gap filling. There are many people who don't have the basic educational standards to be able to get in some of the programs to get the skills to be employed, because there's a gap that we don't fund and put the right money into closing that gap. Lastly, we have to stop expecting people to come to us during 9 to 5 down to our office spaces. I'm going to have a mobile team that will go into the communities, particularly where unemployment is the highest, and they will go in and we will recruit people to be part of this job training program where they are.
Thank you so much, Mr. Borough President Adams. I am now going to move to Mr. Art Chang.
Same question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
The question
Yes, same
was,
question, Art.
Okay, terrific.
Okay.
Right.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Art. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So not every job is going to be the same. And a job by itself is not going to be a cure for crime or a cure for getting in trouble. When I grew up in a domestic violence household in Akron, Ohio, and was filled with anger over my environment, the thing that kept me out of trouble was not a job or a single job or summer school. It was actually seeing a light at the end of the tunnel and seeing a path through to that end of the tunnel. And in New York City, we can do that, but we don't actually do that. So what I'm calling for is actually, I think we need to start with giving students a sense of what that end of the tunnel looks like. What is a path toward a career that gives them not just a wage that mires them in the working poor, but gives them a path toward being able to grab that brass ring and to be able to really be successful. For some of those students, it might be technology. For others, it might be small businesses. For others, it might be a path toward professionalism. For others, it might be a trade. It might be something that actually gives people dignity and allows you to have a life that's filled with dignity. So how are we going to do that? So it's going to have to start in the education system. In middle school, we need to start thinking about algorithmic knowledge. We need to start thinking about using Excel, teaching Excel, knowing math, knowing the structure of grammar. In high school, it's not too early to start thinking about workforce development. We can do that. It's not just computer science and math, but it's also writing, working in teams, doing arts projects. Many students need to work during high school. So why don't we incorporate that into the plan? And then why don't we give them an on-ramp into CUNY and workforce development that sustains them for the rest of their careers?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chang. Ms. Garcia?
Thank you for the question. COVID has really devastated our economy. We have lost over 600,000 jobs. We have to have a city that works for everyone, where everyone has real opportunity, which is why, first and foremost, we need to manage it right. Workforce development and economic development need to go hand in hand. But this starts early with our education system so that we are preparing our kids for what is going to be a career, whether or not they are choosing a career in the building trades, in the food industry, in the science industry, or in the computer science industry. And many of these things actually will overlap and dovetail during the course of your career. You can't actually be an auto mechanic and not use a computer anymore. That is the way work is evolving. But as we think about what we need to do, we need to make sure there are 10,000 internships for kids who are in CUNY, whether or not that's in the private sector, the nonprofit sector, or the public sector. We need to make sure that we are doing work experience during high school. There are some great programs out there already. The Here to Here program, giving kids in the Bronx high school experience. We know that the jobs of the future, 60% require at least some sort of post-secondary educational credential. In some neighborhoods, that's only 20%. If we do not give kids the support, the opportunity, and the jobs to be prepared for so that they can then raise their families in the city of New York, then we have failed them. That means that we are preparing them to not be able to be successful. Giving them a pathway to a real career does change the game on crime. it gets down to that basics that you need to be able to feed your family. Give me the fishing rod so that I can go fish for myself. That is what we need to be doing in the city of New York.
I'm sorry, I have
Thank
to.
you, Ms.
jump-
Garcia.
I'm sorry, I have to jump off to another forum. We're zooming our lives away. Thank you for
Oh,
allowing
and
me.
I'll see you soon. I'll see you soon. In someday they'll let us all do this together.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Borough President Adams.
Thank you.
And I
David?
have to go in about 5 minutes as well.
Okay, so the next question relates to community development. East Harlem was significantly upzoned in recent years, which is resulting in a large amount of additional private development. And there's several major public works projects that are on the horizon, including the Metro North Park Avenue Viaduct and the 2nd Avenue subway. Can you please tell us how your administration will manage the expected growth that will result and how you will protect existing community residents from displacement? We're going to start with Mr. Chang, followed by Ms. Garcia.
Okay, thank you. This is such a thorny problem because there are two big things that are going on. In terms of private development, the city over the past 20 years has essentially ceded envisioning and control over private sector development to developers itself without coming up with an adequate master plan that covers the entire city. For projects like the Metro North Viaduct and 2nd Avenue subway, we see more evidence of fragmentation and this fragmented approach where you're looking at things project by project without any kind of a holistic picture. And then finally, in all these respects, the administration isn't building bridges to the community. And where it does so, it's using this outmoded model called Euler, right? Which, in a day when communities expect a continuum of conversation, starting from beginning through the decision to proceed with the project, communities are instead being forced into this very traditional, old school fashion of meetings, presenting ideas at a hearing, people go away and they do their secret stuff and they come back and there's sort of back and forth. And then finally, the powers that be get to make these decisions and the community goes, well, where's our input? How does that work? We need to completely change how the community interacts with these kinds of programs. So under my administration, I'm calling for a charter revision commission to propose a new way, a replacement for ULURP that actually encompasses and includes greater and more persistent community involvement. And by the way, there's a question about NYPD before, which I was not able to, a question not addressed to me, but I'll say that we also call for a fundamental restructuring of the governance system at NYPD through that Charter Revision Commission.
Thank you so much. Ms. Garcia?
Yes, this is a lack of planning to have all of these different pieces moving. But as a city, as the mayor, you have an enormous amount of control about the sequencing of these projects so that you limit their impact. And you also have an enormous amount of control about ensuring that the community amenities that need to go along with a denser population. For example, do you have the school seats? We don't want to build a bunch of buildings where there are going to be people and kids without having the things that they need around them, whether or not that's open space or schools. We also control the streets in terms of how much construction is going on and when deliveries occur. But we have to make sure we are protecting our longtime residents against being displaced. And that is why I support fully funding protection for tenants in housing court so that everyone has a lawyer and are able to make sure that they are having all of their rights protected. Now, this is something that's incredibly important to keep our neighborhoods growing, but growing in a way that doesn't get ahead of our infrastructure. The getting 125th Street, the 2nd Avenue subway up to 125th Street opens up real opportunity for people in a job market, makes their commute shorter. It could be a real benefit, but we have to ensure that they get to still stay in their communities and be able to raise their families there so that they can have a thriving, livable, affordable city. And that is what I want to bring to the table when I'm mayor, real interaction with community, so that we are hearing from everyone, just like I want in my community, what they need, what is missing, because it's going to be different everywhere. And that as we are rethinking about the built environment, we are including those voices in it, because that is what makes this a livable city. And so I want to really thank you for your time this evening. I'm going to have to jump to my next forum. As the borough president said, I think that I actually asked him, how is it different campaigning in the world of Zoom and not in the world of Zoom? And he said, well, everyone expects you to be at every single thing. They used to at least give you travel time, but now you don't get that. But I really want to say how much I appreciated being here with the East Harlem community. And I do understand fundamentally the struggles that you have had, and look forward to earning your support in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Taylor, from Community Development.
Yes, thank you so much. I agree that we have to have a holistic approach to how we want to do community development going forward. As someone who lives in Brooklyn, which has become the most gentrified and the most developed borough in this city, I've seen firsthand how we have all of this nice new shiny development going up, and we have homeless people sleeping on the streets underneath it. The reality of the situation is that the city, my approach is that we have to build 100% affordable housing. We know all of the information, the demographics. We know the people that are in the city, the household size. We know the income side, wages for various households. We need to utilize that information, and the city needs to invest more of its own funding in building affordable housing, so that's not an issue. We can no longer go down this path of the private public partnership with developers, because developers are in business to make money. The city has a responsibility to provide affordable housing. And when we're doing these developments and we're providing all of these tax incentives for developers, and we're only getting 25% affordability, is just not working. And even when you look at the affordability rates, they're just not sufficient, and they're not in line with what people are making in the city. $2,000 a month rent and $15 an hour wages just don't go. So as mayor, I'm going to look at our capital budget. I'm going to look at things like the fact that we have $6 billion in the capital budget from now to 2024 to build new jails, and say what makes more sense. Does it make more sense for us to utilize that money for housing, or does it make sense to build jails? Because if we had the housing, we probably wouldn't need the jails. And as it relates to protections for tenants, I think that we must provide tenants with protection, but we also need to be proactive to ensure that tenants are not put in a position that they need to have an attorney.
Thank you so much for that response. Mr. Chang, my apologies to you. I somehow missed you on the NYPD question, so I'm going to try to correct that error and give you time to 2 minutes to answer and talk about changing the culture of the NYPD.
Well, thank you for that. That's very generous. The big question is, does more policing equal public safety? And I think as an Asian who has experienced the greatest resurgence of anti-Asian hate for the past 40 years of my life, I would say that, it's very clear that the police are reactive. I mean, they want to be helpful, but they're reactive. They're not preventative. They're not going to cure this epidemic of anti-Asian hate. So we need a different solution. We need, and another fundamental premise of our democracy is that the armed forces report and have duty to the duly elected, head of government, and we don't have that. So what I'm proposing is a three-step process. First, we need to restore governance. Second, we have to demilitarize the response to crisis. And third, we need to have a new definition for safety. So let's talk about governance for a second. So right now, the police chief has the sole power to discipline members of the police force. I believe that has to be changed. That under my administration, that would no longer occur. Second is that we have an underfunded and CCRB that is incapable of actually doing the work that it's assigned to do because it reports back to the police chief. So I'm calling for a completely independent civilian complaint investigation and department audit body, as well as an independent adjudicatory body. The second part is demilitarization. We know 94% of 911 calls do not require armed response. So I'm calling for unarmed rapid response teams that can respond 24/7, 365 just by the police, like with police. And then finally, I'm calling for a redefined notion of safety as inclusive of all the things, the inputs that result in people being unable to have safety.
Thank you so much for that. Before we go to the next question, because we've lost a couple of candidates, we're still waiting for Mr. McGuire to join us. So I think we can go to 3-minute responses rather than 2-minute responses. Nilsa, do you want to ask the next question?
Thank you so much. Thousands of East Harlem residents rely on nonprofits for a wide variety of needs, including childcare, after-school programs, food, English classes, senior services, and art and cultural programming. But many of these nonprofits themselves are struggling financially. If you become mayor, what will you do to help ensure the financial sustainability of the city's nonprofit sector? You have 3 minutes to answer, and we'll start first with you, Mr. Chang.
Thank you for that question. It is a really, really important question. I've been working with nonprofits for the past 30 years, from Safe Horizon for 8 years, to the Brooklyn Public Library for 3 years. I worked on building workforce development and a pipeline to the tech industry at CUNY. And then I spent 9 years on the city's campaign finance board, and I finally served on the school leadership team at Brooklyn Tech. Nonprofits are key to our city. They provide so many essential services that can be directed at specific audiences, but yet the funding is inequitable and the nonprofits are not treated equitably. For example, Asians are 15% of our city's population, but we receive only 1.5% of the city's funding through nonprofits. 1.5%, that's 10%. So great disparities that exist in the city, and we need to look at all the data and the budgets to ensure that all the populations in our city are getting equitable treatment within the budget and through nonprofits. When I first joined the board of Safe Horizon, there was a recurring problem that exists in all nonprofits today. The city depends on nonprofits and calls them partners, but treats them like vendors. Right, invoices are submitted and they are challenged just like invoices from for-profit providers. Nonprofits often don't receive 100% of their payment. They receive a fraction of that, maybe 80% if they're lucky, 90%. And sometimes these payments can extend out by a year or more. So we need to treat nonprofits as partners. We need to be able to give them funding on a timely basis. We need to change our procurement system. And procurement is one of the least sexy areas of our city government, but it is so important. 35% of the city's budget, now $98 billion based on de Blasio's last proposal, 35% is spent on procurement. So we need to think differently about how we spend this money. If we treat these folks as partners, we have the ability to enable them to move more quickly, to be able to serve more people, to think about truly integrated services, intense services. We know from groups like Community Solutions, who are based right here in New York City, or Safe Horizon, that intensive coordinated social services can result in great long-term outcomes. So why don't we do more of that? We need to think about how we treat nonprofits and how we treat small business vendors, by the way, in a way that enables them to be able to have a much more sustainable relationship with the city of New York and be able to afford to provide the valuable services that they do.
Thank you. So, I'm sorry, are you saying something?
I think she was muted, so go ahead, Jocelyn.
Okay. you know, this is a real issue with nonprofits, but with how the city operates with small businesses as well within the city. You know, you have the communities that are dependent upon the kindness of strangers. You have nonprofits that are doing the work to provide the community members with the services that they need. And you have them dependent upon the kindness of strangers in order to keep their doors open. And that should not be the case. You know, I've seen firsthand how the city operates with nonprofits, and we have to change the process. Right now, when you get a contract with the city, there's a process where the nonprofit is responsible for providing the service and waiting to get paid from the city and be reimbursed. And there are many times when, you know, the city talks about Donald Trump, but acts like Donald Trump in the same tone because they don't want to pay 100% of the invoices many times. They're looking for every reason to try to drill down those costs after the services have already been provided. And how do you expect a nonprofit to remain in business and providing the services that are much needed and are the responsibility of the city to provide? So what we need to do is we do need to change the procurement process. We need to open up and give more nonprofits ability to work with the city. But the things that we need to do is, in changing the procurement process, we also have to I want to develop a graduated deposit program so that these nonprofits are not relying on their own finances and credit in order to do the city's work. The city should take more of a financial responsibility for that. I want to improve the invoicing process to ensure that their invoices are being paid in a timely manner and that they're able to maintain their cash flow to keep going. We can't have nonprofits struggling. And also one of the things is that they only reimburse nonprofits dollar for dollar. Although it's a nonprofit, they need funds as well to be able to maintain and keep their doors open. We shouldn't have them operating in struggle mode. So as mayor, I am going to revamp not only just how the city works with nonprofits, but like I mentioned, small and MWBE firms as well. If we want to talk about firms and nonprofits having capacity, we have to build that out. And, you know, I really appreciate the work that the nonprofits are doing. As the city, we should show our appreciation by providing the funds that they need to operate in an efficient manner without being in struggle mode, making sure that, you know, we have clarity as it relates to services, and then making sure that we see that these nonprofits are paid on time.
Great, thank you so much for that. So the next question relates to NYCHA, and Ms. Taylor, we're going to start with you. So East Harlem has one of the highest concentrations of public housing in the country, with over 30% of the apartments in East Harlem being in NYCHA developments. And many of these apartments obviously have issues relating to mold and broken elevators and non-functioning boilers and other problems. We all know that we need more federal dollars, but other than advocating for those funds, what plans do you have to improve NYCHA housing? And the second part of the question is, what specifically is your position on the NYCHA RAD Pact initiative? Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. And, you know, I remain very optimistic. I know Chuck Schumer has had a number of press conferences asking for $80 billion in, you know, President Biden's infrastructure plan. I myself have personally written a letter to President Biden as well as Vice President Harris and various elected officials asking for that funding because it's needed. You know, these NYCHA residents have invested in the city every day. I talk about it all the time. I am from NYCHA, so it's something that's very, you know, important to me because it's 600,000 residents of the city. But we're going to work with NYCHA and we're going to make sure that we have an investment in NYCHA that gives ownership and resident management opportunity to the NYCHA residents. And we're going to fix NYCHA in a way that makes sense. I've gone to a number of NYCHA developments where we see pointing being done outside the building and inside the building is falling apart. We can't have that happening. You know, as mayor, I'm going to have a plan that's going to outline how we need to work to fix the buildings in a proper manner. We need to start from the top down and from inside outside. So that's what my plan is as it relates to the improvements for NYCHA. And we've seen that they've done some of those improvements with RAD, but I'm not I'm not a huge fan of RAD. I don't, support RAD or Blueprint. I don't think that the reward for the residents, being in NYCHA for so long should be that they're now put on Section 8. And if anybody knows all of the hassles and the work and the paperwork that goes with being a Section 8 recipient, that's like giving them another job. We talk about equity all the time in the city. Well, equity is not a Section 8 certificate when people are homeowners. We have to create true equity and create ownership for those residents, but we have to ensure that the money is invested in NYCHA from the federal, state, and city level. And I want to have a plan. I will have a plan to ensure that going forward, we have a maintenance plan, because all of this has transpired because the reality of the situation is that the city has not maintained these developments. Anyone knows that if you own a home or you own a property and you don't invest in it, this is what will happen. So we need to ensure that we have a maintenance plan going forward. This is what used to happen in NYCHA a long time ago. We have to go back to that proactive approach for maintenance for NYCHA residents. So, the investment from the federal government, more investment from the city in NYCHA, because stable housing creates stable communities, ownership for residents who want it, resident management corporations, and no RAD, no Section 8.
Thank you so much for that. I want to acknowledge that Ray McGuire has now joined us. Mr. McGuire, thank you for joining us. We're in the middle of a question about NYCHA, and so I'm going to repeat the question. Art Chang will answer it next, and then followed by you, and we're doing 3-minute responses. So the question is that East Harlem is one of the highest concentrations of public housing in the country, with over 30% of the rental units being in NYCHA developments. And many of those apartments have problems relating to mold, broken elevators, non-functioning boilers, and other issues. We all know there's a need for more federal dollars, but other than advocating for those funds, what are your plans to improve NYCHA? And what specifically is your position on the NYCHA RAD Pact initiative? So Mr. Chang and then Mr. McGuire, 3 minutes.
Great. Ray, nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hey, how are you?
Joycelyn and I have been carrying the water all by ourselves for the past few minutes, so it's nice to see you.
I'm sure you guys are holding your own.
We're doing our best, but now we got some relief.
There you go.
Just the kind of like NYCHA needs.
That's exactly what NYCHA needs.
Exactly. So I'm going to talk about NYCHA in the context of our low-income housing crisis, but I'll talk about NYCHA first. So NYCHA is obviously suffered from decades of neglect. We all know about the infamous $41 billion of deferred maintenance that NYCHA needs. We also know about the 640,000 people who live in NYCHA housing that was designed to house about 440,000 people, right? NYCHA itself is dysfunctional, right? We know that residents call for repairs and they don't happen. And we know that even in the RAD program, that some residents say that they're also reporting claims for repairs, and those are not happening. So the question is, what are we going to do and how are we going to fix it, right? Can NYCHA fix itself, or do we need a different type of a structure? Are we going to wait around for $80 billion in funding from the feds to do this? And if we get it, will we actually know how to spend it appropriately? So I believe we have to do a few different things. Number one, I believe firmly that the RAD program is directionally the wrong way to go. Privatizing public housing is not the right direction. There are some interesting components to it, like creating ownership, an ownership structure for the developers in this case to come in and finance against it. But if the developers can have ownership, why can't we leverage the tools of social housing and social ownership, just like the co-op city? Why can't we think about having tenants become part owners or owners of NYCHA housing in order to be able to generate leverage that can actually help fund the improvements in NYCHA? But it can't be done just by NYCHA alone, right? We have over 300,000 eviction cases pending in housing court. That's like the population of Boston waiting to be evicted, right? The city population has grown by 1 million people over the past 30 years, but we have built almost no low-income housing during a period when the income gap has grown tremendously. So of course, this crisis of NYCHA, of low-income housing, the eviction crisis, we've just kicked the can down the road. So this has to end. So in my administration, we will look at these financing structures, think about how we finance NYCHA differently, but we're also going to have to think about how we create a program to build over 100,000 units of truly low-income housing and be able to do that in the context of today's environment. So I'm really excited by that possibility, and I believe that we can do this and solve this problem for East Harlem and New York City.
Thank you so much. Mr. McGuire.
Yes, NYCHA, 85-year-old complex that today, as you've outlined, is suffering pretty materially. We have a $40+ billion budget deficit, and I'm going to say 450,000 to 500,000 open tickets as of the end of December. So that's probably, updated numbers. 500 is probably a good number. And up to this point, NYCHA alone has been unable to make the requisite repairs and upkeep the needed those necessary to provide safe, quality housing to 500,000 to 600,000 New Yorkers. My approach, to be clear, begins by empowering tenants at every development to create a plan for the investment in their communities. You got to provide them with a budget to hire a planning advisor and all the other necessary support to make informed decisions of the future of their communities. That's going to be critical to making certain that we have NYCHA work the way it should. And I'm going to invest 5 times as much as we have invested in recent years. That's going to be $1.5 billion. So you ask how we do that? In our capital budget. I'm going to separate the capital budget out from the operating expense budget. We have capacity in our capital budget to spend $1.5 billion. And what that should do is to make sure that we get additional federal and state funding that's necessary to bring it up into good repair. And then I'm going to make certain that as we focus, we can use the funds to make NYCHA free of lead, mold, rodents, pests, has consistent heat, because we know in many of our NYCHA complexes that we don't have heat. They don't have enough resources, so that not only do we not have heat, but on the weekends we don't have hot water or working elevators or CCTV cameras and locked doors to improve security. And we've not opened up our NYCHA centers for our elderly who used to use this as a place to convene, or for our children. And so we need to make certain that we continue to focus on this. I'm committed to ensuring that every NYCHA development is wired. And here goes another thing that is so important and critical that we lost. We need to make certain that every NYCHA development is wired for high-speed broadband, and we'll make certain that there are adequate, clean public parks and open spaces. Today, we haven't done that. And so unless we begin to invest today in a concerted way, then the deplorable conditions that exist in our homes in NYCHA will persist. That's why status quo is inappropriate. We have gone back with status quo. We've gone backwards with those who have been career politicians who've promised of everything and delivered nothing. And NYCHA is a shining example of what we need to change, which I'd be committed to changing.
Thank you so much for that. I'll give you a few more seconds, because the other part of the question was your specific position on the RAD PACT program that NYCHA is pushing.
Yeah, listen, we need to sit down with the tenants. That's gotten very mixed reviews. We need to sit with the tenants and the NYCHA homeowners and the co-op representatives to make sure we get their input. So I'm prepared to pause until we get that input and allow the tenants, once we educate them and give them the insights, have them come up with the right decisions for what we do with RAD and Blueprint. Right now, it's not working in many instances. It has the potential, but it's not working in many instances. But I want the tenants to decide what happens in their homes. Nobody will come into one of our homes and prescribe to us what's going to happen. We owe the same dignity and respect to the tenants and the New Yorkers who live in the NYCHA homes. Let's give them that respect, which is what I would do. They would be with me at the table as we reviewed this.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Nilsa?
Okay. So I'm going to ask the next question. This question has to do with affordable housing. There are many mixed-use housing development projects being built or planned here in East Harlem, but many East Harlem residents cannot afford even the so-called affordable apartments in these new developments. What steps would you take to ensure deep affordability for projects funded with city support? I will start with Ray McGuire, and then Jocelyn Taylor, and then Art Chang, in that order.
So one of the ways you can assess my approach to this is look at my housing and development plan. And that plan calls for us to build 10% more units than what we currently have in New York City. That is 350,000 units, where I will invest in my capital budget, where we have capacity, $12 billion into building deeply affordable housing. And why is that? We have both a moral and a legal obligation to make sure that we provide housing to New Yorkers. And today we haven't. Given the number of New Yorkers who are now in shelters and the number of New Yorkers who are homeless, we need to build deeply affordable housing. When we were building in New York, we built 2.2 units of housing for every new private sector job. Today, that's maybe 0.5, 0.7. 45+% of New Yorkers are rent burdened, which means they pay more than 50 to 60% of their income in rent. And so the housing that we've built has been at the housing that people were making what they call 80 to 100% of area median income, between $80,000 and $100,000. This is the housing that we built during this administration. We need to build houses, and there's an example of that about which I'm speaking in the Bronx called the Bronx Common, where we built 300 and some odd units. It has a deeply affordable. Rents go from $225 a month to the most is $1,999 a month. It is powered by solar panels in many ways. It's got a concert hall. There's a gymnasium. There's a facility for seniors. And the concert hall is indoor, outdoor. It's got a restaurant. We know we can do this. And so my plan, my vision is to build with that concept in mind, which also means that I'm going to double the number of housing for elderly, for our seniors, to live in and live in with dignity, with appropriate services. The examples exist. And for a city where there's city-owned property, we need to make certain that we reduce the cost of building the houses, because the most expensive part is going to be the land. And so the Wedco development that I'm describing at the Bronx Common was done just through that. They cut the cost of building down, and they invested in what is got to be one of the great examples of what we can do when we invest in the city. So my plan is to build homes, 350,000 deeply affordable homes, to relieve the rent burden that many New Yorkers are now experiencing, so that you don't have to pay more than 30% of your income in rent, where you can live with your families. And my plan is to go from homelessness to home ownership. And you can explore the plan at rayformayor.com. It's in detail. And with the $12 billion that we can use in the capital budget, that means we're going to be accessible or eligible for funds from the state and from the federal government that could get us up to $40+ billion worth of capacity to build. So we know how to do this. We have examples of having done this. We have the capital to do this. And with the avalanche of dollars that have been given to us in the stimulus package, we can even access some of that, for so long as it is not irresponsibly spent, which is the direction in which we're currently headed. And I have the experience of managing budgets and building projects of this magnitude. And I have a track record for having done that successfully in a business which I've run for longer than anybody else in the history of that business that I've run anywhere in the universe.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. You know, one of the things that I said at a previous forum that I was on is that if you want to address homelessness, you give homeless people addresses, right? And the reason why I bring this up when we're talking about, affordable housing is that we've actually, with the current affordable housing plan that we have, we've actually made more people homeless. Because we've built affordable housing that the costs have been so exorbitant that other people in the community are like, well, if he's getting $2,000 a month, I'm going to kick my tenant out and I'm going to get $2,000 a month. But we have to change that. And that's why I talked so previously about the fact that we have to end this private-public partnership, because developers are in business to make money. And nobody's mad at them about that. But the city of New York has to be in the business of providing true affordable housing. And what does that mean? That means 100% affordable housing. Because once you give someone housing, you don't have to worry about next year paying to give them housing again. It just makes common sense that we do that. And we have to build the housing. It has to be based upon, again, what I said, the demographics. It has to be based upon the family sizes and the incomes that we know exist in this city. You know, we have to be able to meet people where we're at with that. And as it relates to the AMI, we have to address the AMI, because when you look at the area median income, currently we're taking in the incomes of communities that are not part of the income, we're taking in income from communities that are not going to be part of where the development is going to be. So if we're taking in the income of someone in Westchester for a Bronx development, even the AMI is going to be off. So I want to look at that, and I want us to come up with a new system. I will come up with a new system for us to actually build housing, like I said, based upon the incomes that we know. And, you know, that's why this stimulus package is so important, because of the fact that when we talk about infrastructure, and I know there's been a lot of conversation about the fact that housing is not infrastructure, but human infrastructure and housing is the most important infrastructure that we can invest in. And we have to invest in it, because stable housing creates stable communities. We can no longer continue to build housing that's $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month. You know, we have teachers that are not making enough to be able to afford to live in this city. And we talk about, you know, why we have inexperienced teachers. We have to work towards the results that we want to see. And as mayor, that's what I'll do. 100% true affordable housing based upon demographics, income levels, and family sizes. And we're going to take that $6 billion that we were about to spend for new jails, and we're going to invest it in housing.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Mr. Chang?
So the problem is absolutely enormous, right? It's absolutely breathtaking, right? I had mentioned the fact that we have 300,000 eviction cases pending in housing court, so the population of Boston. And we know that the so-called affordable housing is not really affordable to most average New Yorkers, depending upon how AMI is calculated. And let's just kind of like set that aside for a second. Let's use a number of 69,000, which is the average, the median household income in this city. Right after taxes, maybe you're looking at, you know, $55,000. Divide that by 12 months, maybe you're looking at, so let's say $5,000 a month. 30% of your income is supposed to be what's spent on housing. So what's that? $1,500, $1,800 a month? Like, where can you get an apartment for a family for that kind of money? And that's the median. And so when you're looking at these in terms of real numbers, we're talking about some really, really, really tough numbers. And the private sector is never going to come up with this. This is going to have to come from the city. It's going to have to be publicly funded or backed by public funding. And it's going to have to be done on city land to lower the costs. But we're also going to need to think creatively about this. I mean, I agree with Ray that we're going to have to look at things like social housing as a way to move people from rent to ownership. But we're also going to need to think about having mixed use communities, mixed income communities, so that you have people who can afford more money being able to offset some of the costs from the people who can't afford it. And that actually creates a healthier community all around the board. We're going to have to look at how we use technologies in housing. I'm the only person who has worked on manufactured housing in this race. We can think about how we bring in new housing, because right now there's a discussion about how we modernize the city's building code to allow for some of those innovations in building construction, to lower costs and speed the development. So we can do that. And by the way, maybe we can even do that in a way that creates jobs here in New York City, good union jobs that pay a living wage, doing something that is the future of home building. So there are lots of ways that we can do this. But we also need to remember that a house is just not a house unless it's in a community. It needs to have schools, healthcare centers, groceries, childcare centers, so that you can have a livable community instead of the housing warehouses that we have today. So we can bring these things to bear across the city. And I go back to this idea that we have to have a citywide plan for how we roll this out and where we place these things. Because, by the way, the other thing that we're not mentioning is that by 2100, the seas are going to rise by 10 feet. And that is going to change the contours of our city. And in East Harlem, it is going to force a lot of people from the waterfront toward higher ground inland, and we need to figure that out.
Thank you. David?
Thank you so much. The next question is going to have to be the last one because we need to leave time for closing statements. And if we can keep these responses to 90 seconds, which is unfortunate because it's a very important topic. There's been a great increase in attacks on Asian Americans in New York City, including a horrific one right here in East Harlem. So please tell us what your concrete plans are to address this increase in hate crimes, both in East Harlem and throughout New York City. We're going to start with Mr. Chang, followed by Mr. McGuire and Ms. Taylor. Ms. Chang?
Well, I was born in Jim Crow Atlanta. I grew up in all-white Ohio. A lot of the things that we're seeing today are things that I grew up with day to day. The reason I came to New York, among the many, is because New York is a place where I could belong, where I didn't feel different, and where I could live a peaceful existence and grow and be able to raise a family and do all the wonderful things that I've had the privilege of doing. It's only really been in the past couple of years that this has really come back in full force in a terrible way. So a number of things. Number one, we know that the most violent crimes being committed against people who look like me are from people who are mentally ill. We must implement a really ambitious program to create 10,000 beds of supportive housing to start to move these folks off the streets and get them treatment. The second thing we have to do is bridge across a community. We are a majority minority city. I don't even know why people use the word minority anymore. We have about a 40% immigrant community, but the great thing about the city is we can learn from each other. The Black community, the Jewish community, the Muslim community have all experienced tremendous amounts of hate in the past and discrimination. So we can all gain together and use our common experience to be able to look out for everybody. And then finally, we need to offer history in our school system that reflects the backgrounds of all the people who live in New York City.
Thank you so much. Mr. McGuire?
Listen, I'm always reminded of the words of Martin Luther King Jr., injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that we're tied in an inescapable garment of destiny. What affects one affects all. So we need to address this. We need the leaders of the city, the leader of the city, the mayor, to stand up and denounce this. We need to make sure that we invest in the anti-hate crime unit to assess the occurrences. We need to make sure that we invest in safe place for those who are victims and for those who would like to report but don't feel safe reporting. We have yet to make sure that what are the maybe numerous cases that have gone unreported. So we know that it's underreported, and we need to make sure that we address that, and we need to do it in a way that is culturally and linguistically able and open and available. And we need to make sure that wherever we see this, that we denounce it from the outset. And so I would be focused on one, investing in making sure that it didn't happen. And it's clearly highly personal to me, given I'm a Black man, been in this city for as long as I've been in the city, been around for as long as I've been around, and recognizing that because of race or because of other considerations that people have that identify themselves, that we're seeing anti-Asian, anti-American hate crime, we're seeing anti-Semitism, we're seeing racism every day. And it is that we need to denounce at every moment that we can get, and make sure that we have the services in place, including and especially the mental health care experts, to go and make sure that we address the mental health issues that have resulted in the violence against the anti-Asians. And so we need to make sure that we do that. And that is that on which I'd be focused in specific.
Thank you so much. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. You know, I remember as a little girl when I was on City Line, and I remember someone calling me the N-word, and I didn't even know what it meant. I had to ask my mom what that was. So it saddens me that many, many years later, we are still dealing with these type of issues. And I think, you know, part of what we have to do is that we have to educate our communities on inclusion. But I also think that in addition to having information as it relates to education on our history, we have to start teaching some of the fundamentals that I think that some kids are not receiving at home. You know, compassion, empathy, you know, that we are all the same. We're all human beings. We can't trust these life lessons to the parents anymore. We have to get involved, because this is getting to be a situation that is really becoming out of hand. And I think part of it is a huge mental health issue, because when you look at the instances, you can see that these individuals have mental health problems. So we have to address it. But we also have to think about what we want to see going forward. And we have to start having these conversations in school so that we don't, you know, have a next generation of individuals that are coming up with this same mindset and thinking that this is okay, because it's not acceptable. As my cousin would say, we're none of us of our best selves by ourselves. We are all interconnected, and we have to start building on communities and supporting each other. And when we see something, help others, help someone out. Help someone out if you see something, be the voice for someone else.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're now going to turn to closing statements of 90 seconds each, starting with Mr. McGuire, followed by Ms. Taylor, and then Mr. Chang. Mr. McGuire.
Thank you so much. You know, when I came to New York City 4 decades ago, I had 3 things. Based on my mother's sacrifices, I had a great education. I left home when I was 16 by myself. I took a Greyhound bus around New England looking for education. I was able to do okay there, and then I applied to colleges and got into Harvard College, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Business School. New York City has been great to me. I came here with great education, with a lot of debt and no money. And it's been where I met my extraordinary wife. It's been great to me personally. It's been great to me professionally, where I've been able to climb the ladder. And in so climbing the ladder, I have been able to create more opportunity and get more people promoted and get them jobs, and created more economic wealth than all the other candidates combined. And I've been able to, and I had to manage budgets larger than most budgets. And in the depth of financial crisis, I had to do more with less, and often I had to do everything with nothing. So given my lived experiences and what I've been able to do in this city and the organizations in which I've been involved, I've been able to come up with a combination that's necessary to lead this city forward. I'm not a career politician. I'm an outsider, but I do have a track record. New York City needs something different, because the status quo will make certain and guarantee that all New Yorkers are behind, that they continue to go in reverse. My plan is to be a leader in whom this city can believe, and in whom they can trust, and whom they can hold accountable. And in my neighborhood, the reason that that is appropriate is because I got receipts of having made a difference in the lives of all New Yorkers, and I'll continue to do just that. Go to rayformayor.com and you'll see my plans in support of New Yorkers.
Thank you so much. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. You know, we have all sat back and we have watched as elected officials have talked in circles. They come up with 5-year plans for 4-year terms, and they know every reason why something can't happen. You know, during the pandemic, my family and I, we played Monopoly, and we changed all the rules, and it was fun. We had a really great, you know, an interesting game. But we hear people talk all the time about politics being a game. How you have to know how to play the game of politics. But unlike the game that I played with my family, the leadership in this city should not be playing games with people's lives. The decisions that are being made are not about politics. It's about people. And it's about their lives, and ensuring that during our lifetime on this earth, everyone is okay. And it's far past time for us to stop playing games with people's lives. So I'm running for mayor not because I have political aspirations. I'm not running for notoriety. I'm running because it's time for all talk politics to end. This is a pivotal time. And in order to ensure that we rebuild equitably, we're going to need someone in office that understands the implications and the end results of policies that are implemented by the leadership in this city. I know the implications because I've lived with those implications. And I want to ensure that the next generation doesn't have to live with them as well. The opportunity for us to do that is right now, and it's in front of us. So I hope that you will seize that opportunity. Go to taylor42021.com look at my platform, get to know me, follow my social media. Working together, we can create the true change that I think we're all ready to see.
Thank you so much for that. Mr. Chang.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here and to be able to speak with all of you. I'm super delighted and excited that I was just endorsed by the League of Independent Theaters in the #1 position for this mayoral race, which reflects, a lifelong commitment to the arts, one of the most important industries in New York City, right? Responsible for $8 to $15 billion worth of activity, economic activity in the city, and employing about 100,000 people in the city. But, this is like so many of the other things. It's like being Asian. It's like being, queer or gay or where your needs are invisible. After COVID, what happened? The switch got flipped, and it was as if the arts community went away. We can't forget about folks, and especially in the arts. The arts are so critical to who we are. The arts are what makes New York City the greatest city in the world. It is our lifeblood here. We need to bring back the arts in order to make New York City whole. And I say this not just because it's the place where we go to the theater, but it's also our arts education. It's arts as business and economy and employment. But even more than that, arts are the thing that nurtures creativity among the city. It's why New York City is a #1 place where tech workers want to come. It's the #1 reason why the #1 place that startups want to come to start their companies. New York will be the best place to start a company. It'll be the best place to grow a career and the most exciting and fun place in the country when we bring back the arts. So you can see more about my platform at chang.nyc. I offer Zoom open office hours that anyone can sign up for right on my website. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chang, Ms. Taylor, Mr. McGuire, really appreciate your time. Also thank Kathryn Garcia and Borough President Adams, who were here earlier and had to leave after the first hour. So this concludes the Mayoral Forum portion of the event, and we're going to now transition to panel discussion. So I want to thank the candidates again, and again, thank MNN and the viewers, but we're now going to transition to the panel discussion. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for caring so deeply and to run for this office.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, so we're now going to be transitioning to our panel discussion. Nilsa, you might be frozen on our screen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I seem to be frozen on one screen, and I'm not sure if you see two of me or just one of me. My apologies. I was having technical difficulties throughout the forum, but hopefully I'm back now and you all can hear me okay.
Okay, so we see you and we only see one of you. So you want to tell us who's going to be joining us?
Well, so we have a distinguished panel. We have Shirley Anand from the ministry. She's the ministry programs director of Bethel Gospel Assembly. Ms. Anand, would you like to introduce yourself and speak a little bit about your organization?
Well, Nilsa, why don't we introduce all the panelists so that they can all join us, and then we'll have them introduce themselves.
Okay, great. Ana Chireno, the Director of Government and Community Affairs of El Museo del Barrio. Erica Donovan Estades, Chief Operating Officer of the Borican Neighborhood Health Center. Obviously, David Nocenti of Union Settlement, and myself, and Mr. Walter Roberts, the Executive Director of Hope Community.
Great, thank you. So Shirley, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your Bethel Gospel Assembly?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me this evening, Dave. Again, my name is Shirley Annan. I am the Ministry Programs Coordinator at Bethel Gospel Assembly. We are located in East Harlem. We are a 103-year-old ministry that is a loving, learning, launching, and liberating church. We are committed to meeting the needs of the community, both spiritually and practically.
Thank you. Anna?
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be part of this distinguished panel talking about East Harlem issues in this Mayoral Forum. I work at El Museo del Barrio, where I'm the Director of Government and Community Affairs, and El Museo has been serving the East Harlem community for over 50 years, ensuring that Latino artists are well represented in the art field, and also making sure that the Puerto Rican and also the greater Latino community is making sure that they're connected to the cultural roots and making sure that they're culturally empowered through the arts.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Erica.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Erica Estad is the COO of the East Harlem Council for Human Services. And we operate, of course, the Borinquen Neighborhood Health Center on 123rd Street and 3rd Avenue, and also are located in school-based health clinics, a bilingual Head Start, senior nutrition, WIC program. And we've been around since 1965, so also a strong history and collaboration in our community.
Great, thank you. Walter?
Good evening, my name is Walter Roberts. I'm the Executive Director at Hope Community. I guess relative to the other folks, we're the newbie on the block. We've been around 53 years. We are affordable housing developers and property managers. We roughly own about 1,200 units spread throughout the East Harlem and Central Harlem community. We also have our footprint in small business development and art and cultural art.
Thank you. And Nilsa, we jumped directly into the questionings of the mayoral candidates. So you want to tell us about yourself and the multi-service center? All right, so I think Nilsa is frozen, so I'm going to jump in. I'm David Nocenti. I'm the Executive Director.
And I'm the Director of the... Am I frozen again?
No, keep going.
I will come out. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm Nilsa Orama. I'm the Director of the East Harlem Multi-Service Center. As I stated earlier, I'm a lifelong resident, worked with a lot of not-for-profit programs in the community, and I'm looking forward to this discussion and hearing your thoughts on what our esteemed candidates spoke about.
Great. Thank you. And I'm David Nocenti. I'm the Executive Director of Union Settlement, which is the oldest and largest social service provider in East Harlem. We've been in East Harlem since 1895, providing a broad array of services from early childhood all the way up to seniors. So we're just going to open it up to the panel at large. Does anybody, have any impressions from the responses that you heard from the candidates? Anybody want to jump in? Anna, I see you nodding your head. So do you want to kick us off?
I just, the first thing that struck me was just the really clear difference between experienced government managers and kind of everyone else. I think that there are a lot of smart New Yorkers that were, that we heard from today, and a lot of people who are really passionate about issues that they encounter in their own lives and with their neighbors. But I really heard clear policy recommendations, clear budget recommendations, like the nuts and bolts that are required to really run New York City. I thought that there was a real clear line in the sand between who we heard that from and who really did it.
Okay. Anyone else want to talk next? First impressions?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I thought it was a very thoughtful conversation that was held. Appreciate all of the comments that were made. Housing is fairly complicated, so it was kind of interesting to hear what people's thoughts were. And it seemed like the most passionate comments were because of the real life interaction that people had with the folks that they either met or because they knew the housing industry pretty well. So whether you're a product of NYCHA, whether or not you talk to somebody on 125th Street about supportive housing and the supportive housing needs, it seemed like they were at least trying to come up with answers for problems that existed, either because they knew it, because they grew up with it, or because they learned from somebody else who was well informed. So I thought, of all of the panelists that were here, they all spoke very, very well about the topic. But what was clear to me at the end was it's not like you can talk about housing in isolation. It was housing and employment, it's housing and safety, it was housing and education. So they really needed to talk about all of the things. I think, you know, based on the questions that were asked, they were able to accomplish some of what they wanted to talk about through their housing lens.
Great, thank you. Erica, first impressions?
Yeah, you know, I felt pretty great about the forum in the sense that I think that in just a few questions, we allowed the candidates to really show who they were. I feel like, you know, as Anna and Robert said, that there is, you know, we got a good feeling of where people stand, who's strong on policy, who's more, you know, speaking from the heart, you know, and then within that, with or without a background. And I think there was a clear sense of who can do more, who's more polished of a politician as well, and may have foreseen what questions were coming. So I thought it was an interesting hour and a half.
Right. Shirley.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, I mean, the other panelists have touched on it. There was a clear distinction between passion and policy. There were some candidates that I think spoke very much from the heart, but based on their answers, it didn't sound as if they either A, understood the context that is East Harlem, or some of the nuances that would be required in order to actualize some of their ideas, while other candidates sounded certainly more polished, but also offered a bit more in terms of substance and understanding of the nuanced context of East Harlem.
Thank you. So Nilsa, you're back. We're just giving first impressions. Any from you, having moderated?
So I think that everyone was articulate, and I know that it might have been a little disconcerting with some candidates popping in and out, and so we didn't have one full panel answer all one question. I do agree with what my esteemed colleagues are saying right now. I heard a lot of things that made sense to me, and then in others, I heard just more like pat answers. And so, you know, East Harlem has so many different needs, as well as so many different strengths. And so I would have liked to hear more specific East Harlem answers, and not just answers that we've heard in other forums. But overall, I think that the candidates tried to do their best with the questions, but I think that they needed to think more deeply on the substance of what was asked.
Great, thank you. So let's just take, I'll take any of the topics and give me your thoughts on them, like NYPD. So we intentionally asked a difficult question because we weren't asking their position on funding, because I'm sure they all had a stock answer, but how do they change the culture of the NYPD? Anybody have any thoughts on how they responded to that question in particular?
For me, Dave, I feel like there were really only a couple of the candidates that spoke to the culture issue specifically. And I'll point out, I wrote down some notes really quickly, just in terms of specifics that caught my attention. Borough President Adams spoke about the ecosystem of NYPD and the need to define roles. And I thought that that was so important, because I think the way that NYPD operates today, we essentially ask them to address any and everything. They attempt to create programming for any and everything. And I think that that is at the root of a lot of the issues that we see sort of play out in the community. I did appreciate Chang's response, where he talked about restoring governance, and he spoke specifically about the CCRB and the need for autonomy within the CCRB. I appreciated that, because I didn't hear any of the other candidates speak to that, and we know that accountability and consequences is a very big part of changing such an ingrained culture, and I appreciated that his answer addressed that.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to talk on that topic?
Well, obviously, Borough President Adams has sort of an edge there, having been a police officer in his career. But I also feel like the others, because of their interaction with the police, talked from that strength. So Chang talked about demilitarizing the police, which, you know, is something that I guess he felt was important to say. Ms. Taylor talked about humanizing you and in the eyes of the police in terms of who they police, and bringing back community policing. So it's what they knew and bringing it back to the forum, which I thought was interesting and very helpful.
Okay. Erica or Anna or Nilsa, any other comments on that topic? I do want to mention, go ahead, Erica.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
Erica,
no,
go
I
ahead.
just, I would just piggyback on what was said. I thought the demilitarization class, use of that terminology was interesting, and thinking about, nothing new particularly, but I do think that this was one topic on which you really see the difference between the candidates, but nothing more. I'm curious about Anna, what you're thinking.
Well, I'm thinking that just looking, I also have some notes here, looking at the finer points of the responses. Of course, Adams, being a former police officer, was able to speak to the reliance on statistics and comp stats and how that doesn't really accurately talk about how police officers know their beats, know their communities. So he talked about how perhaps police officers shouldn't respond to mental health calls. He talked about accountability, even consequences, right? The fact that if they're bad apples, we need to find a way to identify them and remove them from the police force, which I feel like from prior times that I've heard Borough President Adams talk about the NYPD, I feel like he's really kind of drilled down and kind of really refined his position, and in a way I think responded to some of the conversations we've seen from activists. I think that in the beginning, he wanted to be a little bit more kind of pro-safety, start with that, but it was interesting that he didn't really start with that. He started by talking about, these are the ways I would want to reform the police. And with Garcia, with Kathryn Garcia, I think we see that she's really familiar with city agencies. I like her talking point, but I think it's just a talking point where she's talked about uniformed agencies and she's run uniformed agencies, but I think the NYPD is just a completely different beast. That being said, I did like some of her talking points. She talked about maybe a 25-year-old minimum age for the police, living in New York City. I think people are attracted to that idea. So we saw some really strong kind of policy points, and obviously the candidate's thinking really deeply on this issue.
Great, thanks so much. I want to jump to the first question that was asked, which was about homelessness. We mentioned 125th Street in particular, and several of the candidates showed some knowledge of that specific situation, whether it's about the closing of Pathmark or the transit of individuals from Ward's Island. But interesting, none of them addressed the second part of that question, which was oversaturation of drug treatment facilities. In fact, several of them said, well, we need more drug treatment facilities. So Nilsa, do you want to talk a little bit about that issue? Because I know in your position as chair of Community Board 11, this is an issue that comes up a lot for you.
So I think one of the candidates, I believe it was Borough President Adams, may have said something about fair share. I'm not sure if my notes reflect the accurate thing. And so East Harlem has a myriad of issues, and one of them is the fact that we have an oversaturation of drug treatment programs. That is nothing new to anyone at this panel. So I was actually looking for more targeted information on that and what the candidates felt like. So I didn't really get that that sense. I think some of the candidates may have skirted over it, and so that's one thing that I did not get clarity from. The fact of the matter is that this community has an oversaturation and a fair share. While things were touched on in terms of Randall's Island and people being bussed in, that was an answer that I was looking for, that I was disappointed that I didn't hear more of from the candidates.
Great. Others want to comment on that?
So I actually thought I heard from two candidates that it was the premise that there was an oversaturation. Mr. Chang talked about it, the distribution of drug programs in the community, particularly here. It was clear that everybody has visited 125th Street. It's a tourist attraction. That seemed to have been the comment that I got away from this. But I also thought I heard from Borough President Adams where he distinguished between intervention and prevention, and thinking about GIS tracking to sort of show where these drug treatment programs are spatially located throughout the city. And I thought that was going towards his looking at some equitable split where these programs existed today. Ms. Garcia talked about enforcement tools, which I don't know was addressing the real problem there. And there was some talk about, and I forget which candidate it was about, I think it was Chang, talking about mental illness as being a primary reason for some of the homelessness and the activity that was taking place there, aside from drug dealers and drug users who were out on the corner. And Ms. Taylor, from a mental health services and supportive housing focus, talked about like a way of addressing the problems that were there.
Great, thank you. We only have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we touch on the nonprofit support question, since so many of us work at nonprofits. So what do people think of the comments on that? And I'm just going to give everybody an advisory that at 7:57 we're going to have to transition off. So who wants to jump in on nonprofit support?
I will. I love the fact that we asked the question. I was disappointed that housing wasn't one of the ones that referenced there. Arts, I'm not against it or anything, but clearly, there are those of us who sacrifice and do things the right way in housing, and we need some support. But I do appreciate the fact that they recognized as a group that there is a need for some special attention for not-for-profits in whatever industry you work in.
Others?
I mean, it seems clear that Art Chang knows a lot about not-for-profits specifically. And I thought it was sort of special at the end that he brought in the arts, because that was sort of something that didn't make its way into our questions and is so important.
Okay. Anna?
You took the words out of my mouth. I think that Art Chang really understands the issues. He talked about payment schedules and the sustainability of the work. And I liked his framing, actually, of being partners with government versus just vendors. I really did appreciate that. So he knows the field there. He did give a shout out to the arts, Art Chang, and as an arts organization, I mean, definitely, I love that. He's definitely paying attention. I would have loved to hear from the other candidates about the nonprofit sector. In terms of Ray McGuire, I feel like he's very Bloomberg-esque, right? He's from the corporate sector. He's saying that he can bring in innovation to social issues that are affecting the government.
Okay. Anna, I don't want to cut you off, but we're at 7:57. So I want to thank all of you, particularly thank Nilsa, my co-moderator. Again, thank the candidates, thank the viewers, and thank Manhattan Neighborhood Network for broadcasting both the forum and this panel discussion. It was really a lively and interesting discussion, and I appreciate all of you being here to add your perspective as well. So I thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.